Well, good afternoon, everybody. And my name is David Piper, and I'm on the board of the Churchill Society, and I'm going to be the host of today's webinar, which we're all very much looking forward to. Just a couple points. First off, this webinar is being recorded. And there will be an audio file will be posted on our website after the webinar. Second, the participants are the four of us. The attendees are on, as from now, only view and listen mode only. We are going to facilitate questions and answers. A couple ways you can do this. There is a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen on the Zoom webinar function. So by all means, anytime during the presentation, you can put a question in there and we will try to deal with it. As well, you can put up your hand and at the end of the webinar or Rob's comments, and to the extent we can facilitate it, we will allow you to speak and ask your question verbally. There's also a chat function, and if you would like to put something in the chat function, either to a participant or an attendee, by all means do that as well. So with all that, I would like to turn it over to Malliha, who will introduce today's speaker. Malliha, all yours.
Thank you, David. And hello, everyone. I'm Malliha Wilson, and I'm a board member with the Churchill Society for the Advancement of Parliamentary Democracy. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Mr. Robert Wright as our speaker today. And he is going to be speaking about the restoration of our Parliament buildings. Mr. Wright is the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Science and Parliamentary Infrastructure Branch at Public Services and Procurement Canada. In this role, he is responsible for implementing the long-term vision and plans to restore and modernize the buildings and grounds of the Parliamentary Precinct. With that, I think I will start off with our first question, which is an obvious one. What is the history and background of these buildings and the foundational principles on which they were constructed at the time?
Thank you very much, Malliha and David. And first, I'd like to say it's a great pleasure to be here today to engage with an esteemed group of individuals who are focused on parliamentary democracy and to discuss our Parliament buildings and the efforts that we're taking to restore and modernize them to meet the needs of 21st century parliamentary democracy, as well as to ensure that they instill pride in Canadians for generations to come. And I'm actually here speaking from the construction site for Centre Block, in between taking groups of parliamentarians around the Centre Block to show the construction progress, as well as to discuss some, how the decision points around shaping the Centre Block of the future. So if we can move to the next slide. In October 28th, 1943, so 77 years ago yesterday, Winston Churchill posed this important question and made this important point that, the responsibility of shaping our buildings, that we have the responsibility to shape our buildings because of the impact and import that they have. The images that you see here today are of Churchill giving a speech in the Canadian Parliament on December 30th, 1941. This is the "some chicken, some neck" speech that he made. And this was after the British Parliament had been bombed at the end of the Blitzkrieg, and the House of Commons, the British House of Commons, was hit and required rebuilding. And so his speech and this quote refers to the rebuilding of that chamber and the kind of the import of the decisions that would be taken and what that means for the acts of parliamentary democracy. So it's an important reflection point, I think, on how we shape our buildings and the impact that they can have on our identity. So we've had the shift to the West Block chamber, and there's been conversations around this more modern open chamber whether that is having any impact on how democracy and question period is playing out. Now during the pandemic, in a more virtual parliament, there's been lots of discussion about the act of democracy not attached to a building, and whether that, how that is having an impact. So our real task is looking forward to Center Block, but as Malliha indicated, it's really important to first understand where we're coming from and what are we shaping. So if we can move to the next slide. So this is the original Center Block, and important to put in context. We often think about the Parliament buildings being created for, in a post-Confederation world, but this was really, they were designed and created for the United Province of Canada, which, had the capital had been, the Parliament had been rotating between 1840 to 1867 between Toronto, Quebec City, as well as Kingston and Montreal. And in 1857, Queen Victoria selected Ottawa as the capital. And one of the first acts was for a design competition to be held by the Department of Public Works, of which I'm a member of. And these, wonderful first buildings were built in between 1859 and 1865. So they were actually opened for the United Province of Canada, quickly becoming the Dominion of Canada. They were originally thought of being far too large, but it pretty soon became thought of as too small. But you can see from, there's attachments to Britain with the neo-Gothic architecture, which is in many respects similar to the Palace of Westminster. But there's a Canadianness to this as well, set within the rugged escarpment. It's at the border between Quebec and Ontario, between French and English Canada. The flora and fauna of Canada is carved into these buildings, both on the exterior and the interior. And the story of Canada continues to be kind of imprinted into the buildings as we move through it. So the buildings are meant to, establish a continuity and order, and you can see the linkages to peace, order, and good government, that kind of motto of Canada. And, set into the rugged escarpment, you can see the later cultural elements of the Group of Seven, which were very much borrowed on as we developed the chamber in the West Block. We can move on to the next slide. One of the, and this is just another photo showing the departmental buildings at the time, the West Block and the East Block, and all of Parliament and all of government was meant to fit on Parliament Hill at that time. And that soon the needs for expansion really was a pressure point. And the first kind of spillover beyond Parliament Hill was the former Langevin block, the Office of the Prime Minister and the Privy Council, which was built on the other side of Wellington Street in the 1880s. And we can move to the next slide. So in its original vision, there's a real separation between Parliament and the capital city. Town and Crown was always kind of the identifying factor, and Wellington Street being a border, a boundary between Parliament and the urban core, really a separate enclave of which there was a stone wall built around it. And and that has an impact on kind of the identity of Parliament, as a position of power, authority, accountability, and responsibility. That is starting to evolve now as the need for space has continued to expand. That division, and we'll come back to this, has started to shift, and there's a merging and integration between Parliament and the capital city. You can move to the next slide. So one of the things that we, of shaping the buildings, the chambers are a critical element of that. And a few years ago, there was a study done of all the different styles of debating chambers. So in the 193 countries within the United Nations, there's only 5 models for debating chambers. One would have anticipated probably more. They are all linked to historical roots and meaning. And and there's analysis that has been done on the type of impact that can have on the democracies it plays out on a daily basis. So Britain and the Westminster model, of course, our model as a Commonwealth country, the opposing benches, which really is common with all Commonwealth countries, and really comes from that sense of church pews that were evoked within the Palace of Westminster. The French model and most continental parliaments have this hemicycle, this semicircular arrangement, which there's been analysis that indicate that it's less oppositional. And so that links back to the Greek origins of democracies and the arrangement in that style. If you go to the kind of the Russian model, the classroom model as it's called, so Russia, North Korea, very much with a classroom model linked to less democratic states and more authoritarian. So there are a limited number of models, and as we look to the future, there has been a discussion, of whether the opposing benches is the right setup for the center block of the future. There was a dialogue for a time. We're now quite established that there will be continuity with the opposing benches as we look to the center block of the future, and of course that's been retained for the West Block as well. We can move to the next. So of course we're not really building from that original center block with the Victorian tower. We are really building on to the second center block. Similar to the Palace of Westminster, which burned from a fire in 1834, the center block burned on February 3rd, 1916 during war. With similarities to the chamber being bombed during World War II, and there were some similar thrusts to rebuild immediately, and it really did draw from the spirit of the original center block, but it certainly wasn't slavish to that original center block either. So it was neo-Gothic, Gothic revivalism. It was built larger, an additional floor, with a neo-Gothic, but with a Beaux-Arts axial plan. So there was a bit of an adaptation on the interior of the space as well. John Pearson really being the driving force of this. So a strong focus on symmetry of light coming into the building and creating common space for parliamentarians to come together. It's both a steel frame and a masonry building. So it's one of the first steel frame buildings in Canada. So there were modern influences that came into it. And I would say, the Peace Tower and the Memorial Chamber are really, one of the defining features of this building. And maybe I'll just read a quote from John Pearson to Prime Minister Mackenzie King, which I think evokes the power of the built space. No matter what troubles and worries and differences of opinion take place in the building, I feel that one cannot approach the building up the center road without experiencing its mute appeal for toleration, moderation, dignity, and peace. And of course, those are, in many respects, the brand of Canada that has been adopted. So the impact of the buildings and our culture and our identity are critical. So we can move to the next slide, Sandy, and we kind of transition here a bit.
So, Rob, if I may interrupt
Yes.
here, and I should have mentioned that Rob has both a background in civil engineering and history, which makes him sort of the ideal candidate to be doing this. Now that we've heard a bit about the past, can you tell us about the future? I was just wondering, other parliaments around the globe must have had similar issues, and how are they dealing with it? And did you look at that?
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic question, because it's quite interesting. Classic nation building, European nation building in particular, happened at a similar time frame in mid to late 19th century, and so these grand buildings were built in a similar time period. And even the Palace of Westminster, which has much longer roots, but it burned in the mid 19th century, so was rebuilt. So even it is of a similar time frame. And all of these buildings are going through a common changeover. It's really there's a life cycle of parliamentary democracy. Most of these buildings have changed very little since they were first built in the mid 19th century. And now they're all going through an adaptive change at the same time. So it's a very interesting updating. And what is the impact? What is that interplay between the buildings and parliamentary democracy? And they're pretty much all facing the same three issues. One is that they're really in poor condition. The need for more space. And if you look in the Canadian example, in 1867 there were 180 members of parliament. There's now 338, and that's fully anticipated to exceed 400 within this century. So the need for space continues to grow, and the role of parliament changes, and modernization needs. Our parliament building was built at a time of horse and buggy, before typewriters were really in vogue, let alone the need for a digital backbone. So that modernization is critical, and the security risks in our world have evolved significantly as well. So it's a really interesting dynamic. We actually were leaders in setting up an international network with Parliament, and there's 20 countries that are involved in this at this point. So we share lessons learned and best practices, and it's quite interesting. The challenges are quite more similar from country to country than it is to draw comparisons with other types of infrastructure projects in Canada, I would say. We can move to the next slide. So this just gives you a bit of a view of some of the issues that are being faced around the globe. And one of my favorite photos of all time is in the upper left. It's a heritage conservator actually sticking her arm through the wall of the West Block. So that's just how bad a shape these buildings were in. And you can see the building condition on the right there is, red and black are really bad, illustrating that the buildings are getting into critical condition, or actually they've kind of failed or no longer being used. So it's really was a burning platform, of which we've made a lot of progress, but that exists across the globe.
And so if I may jump in here,
Yes.
This is quite the undertaking for any democracy, and made more complicated by, our democratic structure of the legislature and the executive and so on. How have other projects around the world, have they had difficulties getting something like this going? And actually, how did you make it work in Canada? What was the recipe?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question, and it's tremendously difficult to get these types of projects off the ground. They can seem self-serving for politicians. They're extremely costly. They take a lot of time. They're very complex, and so they don't work well with the shorter mandates that are given for governments and for Parliament. Difficult to find the significant sums of money to be able to undertake these works. So there's been a lot of failures to launch globally, and anybody who's watching, the Palace of Westminster, and we've been kind of keeping very close touch with them, and the real difficulty of getting these off the ground is hard, and we faced our own challenges. But I would, and we can move to the next slide. The thing that, while there's so many similarities between ourselves and other countries, the one thing that we have found to be somewhat unique and has really been part of our secret sauce in the recipe to kind of success is this, what we call the long-term vision and plan. And a real, and you see here kind of one discrete element here, but a lot of work into the urban planning and the development of a vision of a comprehensive precinct for the future, as well as a comprehensive implementation plan. And that's what you see here is a bit of the implementation plan. What we lovingly call the football map, because it kind of looks like a Vince Lombardi sweep from the 1950s. But it illustrates the swing space strategy. So rather than, many other countries have kind of tried to attack the core building first, because that's the most important, and we need to fix that building. But rather than going directly to the center block, we realized that it was critically important to really have a sophisticated plan on how the center block would be emptied, and that was the secret to being able to get the center block off the ground. We also took the approach that, yes, we need to restore and modernize the center block, but we also have a portfolio of 34 important heritage buildings that support the operations of Parliament, and they're all in poor condition and need to be modernized. So we really worked from the bottom up and started with the least important projects, the least controversial projects, and built momentum and demonstrated that we could get things done on time and on budget. And then we were able to get more money to do the next level of important projects. And then, we were able to move up to the West Blocks and the former Union Station that were critical to be able to empty the center block. So not only were we able to build momentum and credibility, we were also able to build skill sets required to be able to make the center block so critical to making a project like the center block a success. So now we're at a point where we're able to take the expertise and skills that have been developed both in the private sector and into the public sector to apply that to the center block. And if we had, like many other countries, tried to just attack the center block first, I really think that it would have, we wouldn't be where we would be now. It really then, it has to get in such a critical state that there's no avoiding it. And that's, to me, not the best way to accomplish this. And at the end of the day, we will have been able to restore the whole precinct, not just the core building. So we can move to the next slide. So one of the other challenges of making these projects work is, and you mentioned it at the beginning, Malliha, is the the complex decision-making and governance. And the Canadian case is certainly no exception. In fact, in some respects, it may be more complex than other jurisdictions, because we have the executive branch, who is the custodian and responsible for the planning and the implementation. But of course, we're doing this on behalf of Parliament. And so it's sometimes there can be, dynamic tension between those forces of, well, who's really making the final decisions. And the key thing is we've really shifted to a partnership model. And that has really been fundamental, and to the extent now that, like, for the Center Block, we have an integrated project management office where it is ourselves as project managers, the House of Commons, the Senate, the Library of Parliament, Parliamentary Protective Service. Also, our private sector partners are all in one integrated office working together. And that's critical to create co-ownership of the decisions. And we're also, over time, we've built a much better system of working directly with parliamentarians together with the administrations of the Senate and the House. And that's critical, and that creates that co-ownership, which is fundamental. But it is a challenging dance to move through all of these stakeholders and align everybody up to consensus. And the National Capital Commission has to approve all of the plans and designs, and we'll come later, but we're also developing an Indigenous people space in the heart of the Parliamentary Precinct as well. So a whole new, really critical partnership that is, makes it really important, but it certainly doesn't reduce the risk level. So we can move to the next. So this will just give you a bit of a view of some of the progress to date, and since the beautiful Library of Parliament was completed in 2006, we've completed 24 big projects, and within the last 5 years, 5 really big projects, of which you'll see on the next couple of slides, and they were really critical to being able to empty the Center Block. In the upper left, you see the adaptive reuse of the former Bank of Montreal building, which is now a conference facility for Parliament. And that was an empty bank sitting along Wellington Street before. In the middle and upper right, the upper middle and upper right, you have what was the old headquarters for the Metropolitan Life Insurance building, which was largely being used by the House of Commons administration, and which now is a core part of the operations, accommodating offices for parliamentarians, as well as 10 committee rooms. And you can see the beautiful mosaic, which was painstakingly conserved in the entry. And then in the bottom here, you see what was the original Union Station attached to the, linked to the Chateau Laurier, and which had become a government conference center, but is now, new life has been breathed into it as the new Senate of Canada building. And it's a beautiful, beautiful facility, as you can see from the photos there. We can move to the next slide. So here is, you really see the West Block and phase 1 of the Visitor Welcome Center. And the West Block, really the jewel in the crown here is the West Block chamber. And this was an empty courtyard. It originally, was used essentially for the horses and buggies to rest while parliamentarians debated in the Center Block. And the offices were used, but this, so it was an unused courtyard, and this has really brought, it's the core of that building, and it's the architectural kind of inspiration, it's meant to evoke a clearing in the woods. And there's a lot of group of 7, so you have these large kind of tree trunks coming up and holding the glass roof over the debating chamber, the soaring glass roof, and the light kind of filters through as it does through the canopy of a forest. And it can be, I think, it's quite beautiful. So we can move to the next slide. And this really, the next slide is that, we've now, emptied the center block. The center block construction has begun. The transition of Parliament, this was, a significant challenge. We had to bring in over 30 projects, and they all had to land at exactly the same time. Multiple billions of dollars of projects all had to land at exactly the same time. And then the transition of Parliament over Christmas recess, the packing up and moving of thousands and thousands of precious heritage items, the transition of the chambers, 10 committee rooms, and they all went live essentially on the same day, and they all had to operate. It was a no-fail environment. So it was a challenging period, but it all came off without a hitch, but not without a lot of effort and a lot of collaboration.
So Rob, this is quite fascinating, but it's really been informative, and the pictures are great, by the way. So is this the end of it now that you've emptied out center block? Is that and started on the restoration? Is this the end of the project?
Yeah, and it's a fantastic question, Malliha, because and many people would think that it is, that it was the apex project of the center block of the long-term vision and plan, and in the long-term vision and plan that we have, really one of the core objectives was to get to the center block. But in fact, it's not the end. It actually now gives us the ability, now that we've reached the center block, to not only, lovingly restore and modernize that most important building, but also to pivot and look at the broader precinct and to move to a more integrated approach. So as you can see on this slide, it also allows us over time to reconsolidate the parliamentary precinct and Parliament, because the impact of that swing space strategy, it's decentralized Parliament, and it's pushed operations into the downtown core. So now we're able to kind of reconsolidate as we look forward. But it will also allow us, as we reconsolidate, we want to do that in a really smart way that supports the operations of Parliament in the 21st century, and to create an integrated campus. So rather than a focus on a building by building approach, but how can we have a parliamentary campus that operates in a modern way? So we can move to the next slide. So you can see that, this expansion beyond Parliament Hill and bringing in the 3 city blocks that are directly across from Parliament Hill. So those 3 city blocks were expropriated in 1973 for the express expansion of Parliament, and they've kind of always been at the edges of parliamentary operations. But as we look to the future, we're really going to bring them into the core. We've already, established, I would say, a beachhead with the Sir John A. Macdonald building that you looked at and the Wellington building, which are core to the operations of Parliament. But we will now take a comprehensive approach to bringing those into the precinct, which, as I kind of goes back to the beginning of the presentation. It really, knits together Parliament and the urban core of Ottawa. So uniting town and crown, which is a different evocation for, how Parliament symbolically stands at the center here, and it may have some implications of kind of democratizing even further the Parliament and how it is perceived. So we can move to the next slide. So part of that is, the symbolism of what is a modern Canada, and so universal accessibility is a key part for the buildings, but also the grounds, and making sure that all Canadians are able to enjoy, Canada's town square, and they're able to engage with Canada's Parliament, and that is, symbolic as well of what Canada stands for. So we can move to the next slide. And we're also moving towards a carbon neutral parliamentary precinct over time as well. Again, kind of symbolic of what Canada stands for, and also symbolic of the challenges that we and the world face as a country. So doing that on a building basis, but on a campus basis as well. So we can move to the next slide.
So Rob,
Yes.
this raises the question of, is this pure restoration, or is this restoration and modernization, and will it affect, or how will it affect the way democracy works?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. And I think restoration and modernization, in its best form comes together, and innovation is key to both of them. And you'll see here, some of the innovation that we're bringing. So we're digitizing all of the Parliament buildings in the center block to really support the design work and the construction work. And we're able to then leverage that for digital fabrication to restore many of the heritage elements, as well as virtual storytelling. So and beyond what you see on this page, we're using laser cleaning for the buildings, and on the largest scale on a global basis. And we've got a fairly broad partnership with a number of Canadian universities to work on technical challenges that we're facing, and kind of using Parliament Hill as a living laboratory. And that is working fantastically, and supporting, in lockstep, the restoration and modernization challenges that we face. So we can move to the next slide. So what we really are building on, as we look at the center block, we're building on the past. And you can see here with the Pearson plan for the center block, and the symmetry, the Beaux-Arts plan for the center block, and the symmetry, as well as you can see the courtyards with the importance of light, natural light filtering into the spaces, and the importance of common space as well, which has been lost over time because of the needs of functionality. And so there's still a room called a reading room. It operates as a committee room. It's not really a reading room. And many of the common spaces have been lost because of the need for functionality and that growth of Parliament. So as we look forward, we really want to respect the heritage value and the restore the building, and also find ways to amplify the guidance that was coming from the center block of symmetry and bringing natural light even more back into the building. Some of the light wells have been filled in, and trying to find space for parliamentarians to come together, which we've heard over and over from parliamentarians how important that is for the act of democracy. Yes, you need the functional space, but you also need that space for parliamentarians to come together. So we can move to the next. We can move to, great. So one of the key things is it's a space for parliamentarians. These are working buildings, and it's a place, where our parliamentary democracy plays out and critical decisions are made. But it also, as we were discussing, it's a place for the public, and it's a place to welcome the public. And so as we look to the future, the sight lines of the center block and the Parliament buildings are critically important. And that great lawn, which is essentially Canada's town square, is critically important. So we're trying to find space to provide more ability to welcome Canadians and international visitors into the Parliament buildings, to try to find space so that there can be more education on the role of Parliament and parliamentary democracy, and also to make sure that it is a secure place for parliamentary democracy. And the Parliament Welcome Center is critical to all of those elements. So we built phase 1 as part of the West Block, and now we're extending that across the front of Center Block, and that will really unite. There were tunnels before between the Center Block and the West Block, and the Center Block and the East Block, but this Parliament Welcome Center will really, bring together those 3 buildings into one parliamentary complex. It will provide for the first time a secure screening of visitors outside of the Parliament buildings. And that is critical to ensuring that we can have more access to the buildings in a safe manner. So you see here view planes from the Centennial Flame, and the Vaux Wall and the Grand Staircase will be in the exact same places as they were before. And you can see here on the upper right how the front door to the Parliament Welcome Center and the front door to Parliament will be kind of integrated in under that grand staircase. And in the lower right, you can see that universal accessible access point in there, and the Vaux Wall becoming a kind of an intimate point. Which was hidden behind shrubbery before, if you remember, and that was never meant to be part of the long-term landscape plan. And then other images, you can see the ability to have a point of reference to that most important element of the parliamentary buildings, the Peace Tower. And then in the lower left, the ability for school groups to come in and engage with the importance of Parliament, as well as space for parliamentarians to engage with school groups and their constituents. And that is space that really doesn't really exist within the parliamentary complex at this point. We can move to the next slide.
Rob, I would give yourself about 10 minutes. Okay.
Perfect, that should be great. So one of the challenges that we face, we still face that challenge of growth and finding functionality for the working of Parliament, and making sure that the building remains a grand ceremonial space. So the chamber was built at a point in time when there was many fewer parliamentarians around. So there's 180 in 1867, around 200 when the new chamber was built, the second center block, and that has grown to 338 now, and is fully anticipated to exceed 400. So how to fit the parliamentarians into that chamber? And there's been a lot of discussion with parliamentarians around that. Even before the center block closed down, not all 338 could fit into the traditional paired seating within the House chamber. We moved to theater style seating in the back 2 rows on both the government and opposition sides. As we moved to the West Block, we're able to return to paired seating for all parliamentarians. But as we move back, that's going to be, well, it will be really not possible. So we're working with Parliament. There were, considerations of potentially enlarging the chamber. That we seem to be on a course of staying within the traditional chamber, which I think is great. And now we're working through different types of potential seating arrangements. Could that be benches like in the British Parliament? Could that be other, types of theater type of seating? How do desks work into that? So it creates a dialogue around the activities in the chamber and the roles of the rules of procedure in potential elements such as e-voting. And I think what we're going through now in the pandemic is amplifying that conversation. Too early to say really where that's going to land, but there's, I think, an interesting conversation with many different points of view happening at this point. And you see, the last thing I'll say from this slide, as the number of MPs grow, the challenge of accommodating them in the lobbies where they spend a lot of time. So the plan we're working through is to have the traditional lobbies, but then to provide more support space underneath the chamber, space for eating, space for taking meetings, family-friendly space, washrooms, private places to take, spaces to take calls, etc. So that support space is very proximate to the chamber, as members can spend an extended day in that area. So we can move to the next one. So one of the elements as well is the light coming into the buildings. As you can see on the left, kind of a bird's eye view of the center block as it is, with those courtyards that allowed light to flow into the buildings, but they weren't used space. So one of the things that we're looking at is how can we leverage those courtyards. So you see an early schematic design on the right of the west courtyard, adjacent to the House chamber. And so what this will do is accomplish many different objectives, and we're working through this with Parliament now. It's a real challenge to have universal accessible access to the galleries. So this will create an ability to solve that problem. It also, we face, the sustainability challenge. These open courtyards bleed heat, and so it creates significant heating and cooling challenges for the building. So one of the concepts is to close those in, but allow the natural light to continue to flow through, so enabling us to get to carbon net zero. And it also provides that kind of elbow room critical in the building as the number of MPs continue to grow. So, and the last thing that I'll mention here, you can see on the upper level, individuals moving to the gallery for question period, and what you'd see on the lower level are MPs. So those important spaces where the Canadian public and parliamentarians cross. And so it's a bit of a lesson learned from the Australian Parliament that really moved to segregate the public from parliamentarians for security considerations. And that has had quite a negative impact on creating quite a stale building where there's that complete separation. So we can move to the next slide. So quickly, this will just give you a bit of a view of where we are on the center block right now. It's an extremely active construction zone, more than 400 workers on site every day. You can see in this slide the care being taken with the heritage fabric, carefully taking down the chandeliers, for example. We're doing molds. Not only did we build a three-dimensional model, we're also building molds of all of the key heritage artifacts, and that will help to restore the heritage elements. You can see the linen ceiling being carefully taken down from the house chamber at this point so that it can go through a conservation process. We can move to the next slide. So here's a little more of the kind of core construction work that is happening. And two really key activities in addition to the careful protection and removal of the heritage elements. The excavation of the Parliament Welcome Centre is in full flight. There's been about 5,000 trucks of stone that have been removed already, and that's being recycled into road construction. And there will be about 50,000 trucks that will be taken out in total. And you can see a blast in the upper right. We're using controlled blasts to move along that process. It's one of the highlights of the tours with parliamentarians to have them view one of the blasts as we go around the site. And you can see as well the demolition and abatement of hazardous materials that is happening, and we're starting that in the areas of lower heritage. So there's a careful removal of the heritage material, and then a stripping down to the bones of the building and removal of all of the asbestos and other hazardous materials. And that will allow us to go forward with structural work as well as putting in modern systems. It's a building that hasn't really had modern systems, heating and cooling and plumbing, and a digital backbone that will be hidden back behind that heritage skin. So we can move to the next slide. So I've mentioned a number of times how important engagement with parliamentarians is critical, but again, this is a place for all Canadians. So engaging with the public also critically important. And so as we've pivoted to kind of this campus approach, we're updating the long-term vision and plan, and we're doing an engagement with the public as part of that. And there will be a public opinion research that will be going out this fall, actually. And we've done that in the past. The lower left, the former American embassy, we had a national opinion poll on how best that could be used, and that led to the choice of an Indigenous people space. And we've partnered with the National Capital Commission to have engagement sessions with not only people in the capital, but for people across the country, and they've been well attended. So we can move to the next.
And Rob, I think we have about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay.
Perfect, right on schedule. So one of the last points is, talked a lot about the impact of the buildings, and over time we've really built a digital backbone for Parliament, and that has allowed the reach of Parliament to extend. And not too long ago, if you were to be a witness at a committee, you had to come to Ottawa. Now you can be a witness from across Canada. And as a result of the pandemic, you can also see that it's not just being a citizen that you can engage with Parliament from your region. You now have members and senators that are engaging from their home spaces. And I've had the benefit, quote unquote, benefit of going to committees almost every week over the last several months to engage on these projects. And it's been interesting to be doing that in a virtual way. Sometimes I'm there virtually, as we are here today. Sometimes I'm in the Parliament building, and all of the members are virtual. But it's too soon to say, of course, what type of impact this will have. But it's an interesting interplay of the buildings and the modern world.
So maybe I can ask you this question then. Is there anything else happening in the precinct that you think could have a long-term impact on both shaping our space and our identity. And I would like you to address specifically reconciliation, because our Indigenous history is part of what makes Canada, Canada.
Absolutely. And yeah, thanks for that question, Malliha. And I would move to the next slide. Beyond kind of this digital background and digital democracy, the idea of digital democracy, I would say that the Indigenous people space, and you can see that the former American embassy is a critical step in the evolution of the parliamentary precinct. Of course, it's not part of Parliament, but it's in the core of the parliamentary precinct. And Parliament is built on unceded Algonquin territory. And this, it goes back, this really goes, it links to the back, and it really leans forward of that nation to nation dynamic and relationship between the Indigenous peoples and the Crown. And it's highly, highly symbolic, and it's a challenging piece. And so this is, with the Inuit, the Métis, First Nations, and the local Algonquin nation. So it's a challenging piece, but it's part of the story of Canada, as you indicated, that reaches deep into the past, and it's a journey that we're on. So I think that project is going to, as that moves forward, it has the potential to have a powerful impact. And if we link back to that, we shape our buildings and then they shape us. That will be an interesting journey on shaping those buildings, and I do think that they will have a powerful impact on symbolically shaping us and our identity, our collective identity.
So thank you, Rob. Thank you. That was a very interesting, thought-provoking presentation, and a challenging project that to me seems well on its way, and it's a credit to you and your team. And thank you for informing us about what is happening on something that is very important to all of us. So I think we have a few minutes for questions. Dave, have we lost everybody, Dave? I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. No, I don't see any questions right now, but please put some questions in the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we'll certainly allow you to ask a question. So, we're going to allow Corinne to ask the first question. Corinne, you should be able to. You're muted, so you have to unmute. So if I allow you to chat, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm unmuted, which everybody is happy that I'm doing, I'm sure. You'd like to have that button handy on other occasions to mute me, but for the time being, I speak. Churchill, as you may know, wasn't just giving lip service to that dynamic between the building and the persons who are going to use it. And the beauty of the decision-making back in the day, when they were considering the size of the chamber and expanding it for the normal space growth issues that you've repeatedly mentioned. I believe that Churchill, as the decision maker he was, wanted to have a congested, very bodily close, not enough seating kind of arrangement, which was, when I read of this, I thought, well, this man has so many points of genius, and I instantaneously and intuitively thought he was right, that it gave a sense of dynamism, deconstructing the notion of bureaucracy and settledness, because democracy is that way. It's not a comfortable place, and bodily we're in close contact with one another in more ways than we know in this social distancing. So how do you marshal all those partners in a decision as fundamental of space?
Yeah, it's a really important question and a really good question. And I think what we've tried to do is, to not, even if we have a strong perspective, to not to try and drive to that, but to lay out the options and engage in that dialogue, and to look at the pros and cons. And generally speaking, that is working really well. And I will say, and we've been engaged. It was put in place by Parliament in the spring, a new committee structure to engage with both members of Parliament and senators on these, really important questions. And I mean, the level of commitment and the gravitas that they're bringing to these decisions, and the openness as well, is fantastic. I never doubted that it would be otherwise. And it's been something that's been, missing a little bit in the past, is that direct engagement with parliamentarians. And it's really being positive, and they're really engaging on what's the art of the possible, what are the pluses, what are the minuses. And on this question, we looked at a range of options, such as making the chamber larger. And I think only by putting that option on the table did we quickly get to a fairly strong consensus that no, we want to, keep that heritage space, and with the result that it will become an increasingly intimate space for parliamentarians. So in a way, it's a bit of a full circle back to that statement by Churchill for where we are going.
Thank you. I think sorry, go ahead, John.
No, sorry. We have some more questions here. Do you want me to ask them, or should we wrap up?
Rob, I think we can. Are you available?
I have some time available if.
Okay.
Totally up to you.
Okay, so the first question is, what is the timeline for final completion, and how can you possibly set a budget for this?
Yeah. So those are we always get those questions, and they're pertinent questions. And so the key thing is we're working through these big decisions with Parliament right now. And it's important that the scale of this project, that there's thousands of decisions, but there's a list of really fundamental questions that will set the course of the budget and the schedule. The chamber was one of those decision points of whether we were going to, increase the size of the chamber or stay within the footprint. The size of the Parliament Welcome Center was another one. How we address these infills at the end of the day. And we're making good progress of that on those with Parliament. I would anticipate by the new year, I'm hopeful that we will have moved through all of those big boulder decisions. There'll still be lots of more decisions, but sufficient clarity on the vision and the structure of the building to be able to establish a baseline for the budget and the schedule. And it is challenging. There's no question about that. But we have a solid track record, and it goes back to leveraging the lessons learned from all the other projects we've done, the West Block, the Senate of Canada building, etc. And we've got a strong track record of bringing those projects in on schedule and on budget. And this will be a really big project. There's no question about that. And there will probably be a healthy public conversation about that. We want to make sure that it's well founded on the decisions and on a clear understanding of kind of the condition of the building and where we're going with it.
Okay, thank you. Now Cameron Mackay has a question. I'm going to allow Cameron to speak, and remember, Cameron, to unmute yourself there. Cameron, go
Am I
ahead.
unmuted now? Hi. No, my question was, did the media or the press corps have any special asks of you, and were they accommodated? Yeah.
So yeah, so we have over the years a number of media tours of the project sites, and then in the last year of the West Block, we were putting out almost daily videos, just because the transparency is super important. Just before the center block has really, it launched from a construction perspective in 2020, really just before the pandemic hit, and we were in a number of conversations with media just before that, and the pandemic kind of had an impact on that. We're now taking a number of parliamentarians through, where our plan now is to develop a video tour that would first be, we'd make that available to all parliamentarians because not everybody's in Ottawa now, and then make that available publicly. And then there is the plans for engaging the media to come through the spaces and to do that on a regular basis throughout the life span of the project. And there's been some discussions about, would there be, a special type of ongoing documentary type of production. Nothing has come to grounds on that yet, but I think there's lots of possibilities out there.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. I think it's pretty well 10 after 1, so now is probably a good time for us to wrap up. So Malliha, do you want to wrap up?
Yes, thank you so much, Rob. As I said earlier, it really gives us a really good insight. One of the pillars of our society is parliamentary democracy. Great work, and we're all very proud of our parliament, and now it's the restoration and modernization of it. And thank you for your staff as well for having helped put all of this together. I know it took quite a bit of work. And with that, I think we can conclude our session. As David said, right, the audio will be uploaded onto our website. So for folks who missed it, you can listen to it in a few days. Am I right, David?
Yes, it should be posted sometime in the next few days. And I have one final word here. This is a word from our president, John Parker, to say that our next event will be around the awarding of the Churchill Award, which unfortunately won't be our typical annual dinner, but will be a virtual event. More details to follow. So with that, I will end the webinar, and everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.